to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
You're here now, in a quieter pocket of the evening. Welcomed gently to Deep Sleep Stories, where words move slowly and softly, like a lantern carried through mist. Tonight you'll drift into a tale about a raincoat so tender and comforting that even the shyest rain forgets how to fall too hard. Let your body settle the way a blanket settles, finding its own natural folds. Unclench your jaw. Let your shoulders melt down and away from your ears. If your hands are holding anything at all, tension, plans, old conversations, allow your fingers to loosen as if they are opening to release feathers into the air. Breathe in as though you're sipping warm air from a cup, and breathe out as though you're setting something heavy down on the floor. Again, a slow breath in and a longer breath out until the space around you feels wider, calmer, more forgiving. Imagine a room lit by the smallest, kindest light. Outside night rests against the window. The world does not demand anything from you. The air carries a faint scent of rain that has not yet arrived, like a promise whispered to the rooftops. Somewhere far away, a cloud is gathering itself into softness. And as you listen, you can let your mind float. You don't need to chase the story. You only need to let it come to you like gentle weather moving in, like a quiet tide. Somewhere beyond wakefulness, beyond the last bright thought, there is a place where rain is not a bother or a burden, but a lullaby the earth hums to itself. In that place, there was a small town called Larkhaven, tucked between low green hills and a river that moved with the patient grace of a ribbon. The houses leaned companionably toward one another as if sharing secrets. Window boxes brimmed with herbs and trailing vines, and the streets were cobbled in stones that shone softly after every shower, as though they enjoyed being polished by the sky. Rain visited Larkhaven often. It arrived without drama, never in a hurry, never with sharp elbows. It came in thin silver threads or wide whispering curtains, and sometimes in a mist so gentle it felt like the air had decided to exhale. The townsfolk didn't complain. They had learned that rain was simply another kind of light, one that made everything smell alive. Soil, leaf, bark, bread cooling in open windows, wool drying near hearths. On an evening when the clouds were low and friendly, a traveler wandered into Larkhaven with the unhurried steps of someone who had stopped measuring time. Her name was Mira. She was not lost exactly. She was simply between places, the way a lullaby is between silence and sleep. Mira carried a small pack and wore a simple coat that had seen many seasons. The coat was sturdy, but it had begun to feel like a thin wall against the world. When rain fell hard, it drummed against her shoulders. When wind rose, it pressed through seams and reminded her of every mile she'd walked. She paused on a little footbridge over the river and watched the water curl around stones. Along the banks, reeds swayed with a steady, comforting rhythm. A faint drizzle began, so light it barely darkened the wood beneath her boots. Mira breathed in and smiled without quite meaning to. Something about the town felt like an invitation to slow down. The air seemed to say, "You may rest here, you may soften." A bell chimed somewhere, not loud, but clear and rounded, like a drop of water plinking into a bowl. Mira followed the sound and soon found herself in a narrow street lined with shops, whose signs swung gently on iron arms. There was a bakery with windows fogged from warmth, a little bookshop with a golden lamp in the front, and a florist whose doorway was guarded by sleepy bundles of lavender. But Mira's attention was caught by a modest storefront with a sign that read, "Cloud and Thread." In the window hung coats, some long, some short, some with hoods like little shelters. They looked like ordinary raincoats at first glance. But the longer Mira looked, the more she felt a strange tenderness rising in her chest. These garments seemed calm, as if they had been made by someone who understood the language of weather. Mira stepped inside. The shop smelled of clean cloth and dried herbs. A small stove ticked quietly in the corner. Along the walls were shelves of folded fabric in tones of river gray, moss green, twilight blue, and the soft, creamy white of clouds. In the center stood a wooden table scattered with pins, thread spools, and a smooth stone shaped like a raindrop, used as a paperweight. Behind a curtain of beads, an older woman appeared, as if she'd been standing there all along. Her hair was silver and braided loosely, and her eyes held the patient shine of rain-washed leaves. "Welcome," she said, her voice like a shawl. "You've come in on a gentle evening?" Mira nodded, suddenly shy. "I saw the coats in the window." The woman's smile was small and warm. "They like being seen. Coats are quiet creatures, but they enjoy a bit of admiration. I'm Brindle." "Mira," the traveler answered. Brindle inclined her head. "You've been walking a long while." It wasn't a question, and Mira, who was used to people either ignoring her entirely or asking too many things, felt her shoulders loosen again. "I have," she admitted. Brindle moved to a rack where several raincoats hung, each one looking softer than the last. "In Larkhaven, we take rain seriously," she said, as though speaking about music or tea. "Not because we fear it, because we respect it. Rain touches everything. It should be met with kindness." Mira ran her fingers over a sleeve. The fabric was smooth, yet somehow plush, like the surface of a petal. It didn't feel slick the way most rainproof cloth did. It felt like it would welcome a raindrop rather than fight it. "This is," Mira began, searching for the right word. "Comforting," Brindle supplied. "Yes." Brindle watched Mira with gentle curiosity. "You've heard the rumor, haven't you?" Mira blinked. "The rumor?" Brindle's eyes glittered softly. "About the softest raincoat in the world." Mira had not heard such a rumor until that moment, Yet when Brindle said it, Mira felt as if something inside her had been waiting for those exact words, like a seed recognizing water. "I didn't know it existed," Mira said. Brindle's smile widened just a little. Most people don't. Most people think the world is made only of what can be easily pointed to. But the softest raincoat in the world isn't only an object, it's an experience. A way of being held by weather, rather than chased by it. Mira stood very still, listening as the rain outside brushed the roof in quiet strokes. Brindle crossed to a cabinet and opened a drawer. Inside were buttons carved from pale wood, clasps shaped like crescents, and small rolls of ribbon that looked like streams caught and folded. She lifted a small vial and held it up to the light. Within it shimmered something faintly pearlescent, like a piece of cloud that had learned to stay. "This," Brindle said, "is cloud milk. Not from any ordinary cloud, from the kind that drifts low over the hills when the moon is thin and the air is cool enough to dream." Mira stared, feeling her thoughts slow down. "How do you get that?" Brindle capped the vial and returned it carefully. "We listen, we wait, we ask, and we make offerings. Tea for the mist, bread for the wind, a song for the river. The world gives if you speak to it gently." Mira's gaze returned to the coats on the rack. One in particular seemed to draw her in. It was a shade somewhere between dawn and pearl, almost colorless, but not empty. More like it contained every pale hue at once. Brindle followed Mira's look. "Ah," she said softly, "that one isn't for sale." Mira's cheeks warmed. "I'm sorry, I wasn't. It's all right." Brindle's voice held no sharpness. "It's simply unfinished. That coat is meant to become something rare, something very soft. But it requires a final thread, and that thread can't be bought." Mira's curiosity moved like a slow tide. "What thread?" Brindle reached up and touched the coat lightly as if greeting it. "A strand of hush, the kind you find in the moment between a raindrop and the puddle it joins, the kind you find when the whole world pauses to listen." Mira felt the idea settle over her like warm steam. "And where would someone find that?" Brindle's eyes softened. "Sometimes a traveler finds it without trying. Sometimes the world places it in their path when they're ready." Outside, the drizzle became a steadier rain, still gentle but fuller. It made the windows glow with moving water. Brindle turned to Mira. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes," Mira said, and it came out like relief. Brindle poured tea into 2 cups that were slightly mismatched in the most charming way. They sat at a small table by the stove as the rain sang outside. The tea tasted faintly of chamomile and something else. Something like the scent of clean stone after a storm. Mira held the cup with both hands and let the warmth travel slowly into her fingers, then up her wrists, then through her arms to her chest. Brindle spoke in a drifting way as if her words had plenty of time. "The softest raincoat in the world," she said. was first imagined by someone who was tired of fighting weather. Not because weather was cruel, but because the person had become too braced, too prepared for discomfort. They wanted to walk in rain and feel safe, not armored, not hidden, simply held. Mira listened as the fire ticked and the rain continued its patient story. Brindle went on. The coat is made from cloud thread and river sheen, lined with brushed fern fiber and stitched with a needle that has never known hurry. But its softness isn't only fabric. It is the way it helps the wearer soften too. Mira felt her eyelids grow heavier, though she was fully awake. Something in Brindle's voice was like a slow rocking. "And you're making it," Mira said, though it felt like saying, "And the moon is shining," a simple truth. "I am," Brindle agreed. "Or rather, I'm helping it become itself. The coat already knows what it wants to be. It only needs the final thread." A quiet pause opened between them. Then Brindle leaned forward slightly. "Mira," she said, "would you like to take a walk?" "In the rain?" "In the rain," Brindle confirmed, as if that were the most natural place to walk. Mira glanced toward her own worn coat. The thought of stepping outside made her shoulders tense a little, remembering cold drumming drops, heavy dampness, the cling of wet fabric. Brindle seemed to read this gently. She stood and went to the rack, selecting a different coat, deep gray like a friendly cloud. She held it out. "Try this," she said. "It's not the softest one, but it's a close cousin. It will make the rain feel kinder." Mira slipped her arms into the sleeves. The coat settled over her shoulders with a surprising lightness. The lining was warm without being hot, soft without being bulky. It felt like being wrapped in a quiet, steady presence. Brindle handed her a hood. "This one likes to keep secrets," she said with a small smile. "Let it cover you." Mira pulled up the hood and felt her hearing change slightly, as though the world had stepped back to give her room to breathe. They stepped outside together. The street gleamed. Rain fell in fine strands that caught the lamplight and turned it into threads of gold. The town had become a painting of reflections. Windows mirrored in puddles. Lanterns doubled, the dark shapes of trees rippling on the wet cobbles. Mira waited for the familiar chill of rain pressing through cloth. But instead she felt something else. A gentle, cushioned patter, as if the raindrops were tiny hands tapping politely to say hello. The coat did not repel the rain harshly. It guided it. Water slid down in slow, quiet streams, never grabbing, never soaking. The sound of rain on the fabric was soft, more a whisper than a drum. Brindle walked beside Mira at a pace that matched the rain's unhurried rhythm. They passed the bakery, where the smell of cinnamon drifted out in faint ribbons. They passed the river, which looked darker now, but calm, like velvet. Brindle led Mira to the edge of town, where a path turned between hedges and disappeared into a stand of trees. The trees were tall and patient, their leaves glossy with water. They entered the little forest, and the air shifted. It smelled of wet bark and earth and something green that felt like a color rather than a scent. The path wound gently, raindrops slid from leaves in slow motions, dripping like the ticking of a very quiet clock. Mira's breath fell into step with her feet. In, out, in, out. The raincoat moved with her body like it had been made for this exact walk, for this exact evening. Soon they reached a clearing where the ground was covered in moss, so thick it looked like a sleeping animal. In the center of the clearing stood a small stone basin filled with rainwater. Beside it grew a plant with round leaves that held drops like little glass marbles. Brindle approached the basin. "This is the listening bowl," she said, though it looked like nothing more than an old stone that had agreed to hold water. Mira stood near the moss and watched the surface of the water. Raindrops landed and made circles that expanded, touched, and disappeared. Brindle crouched and placed her hand just above the basin, not touching the water. "This is where the hush thread sometimes appears," she said. "Not always. It has moods, but this is one of its favorite places." Mira watched, feeling the raincoat's calmness settle deeper into her muscles. The rain on her hood sounded like a lullaby hummed through cloth. The clearing was quiet enough that Mira could hear the smallest things, the soft drip from a branch, the almost silent shifting of leaves, her own heartbeat steady and low. Brindle spoke again, her voice barely louder than the rain. "Hush thread isn't taken," she said. "It's received. When you stop trying to make the world do anything at all, the world sometimes offers you a gift." Mira looked at the basin again. The rainwater rippled. In the center of the ripples, something glimmered. At first it looked like a reflection of lantern light, but there were no lanterns here, only moonlight filtered through clouds. The glimmer grew into a thin, pale line drifting just beneath the surface, moving as if it were alive. Mira's breath slowed. Her thoughts softened further, losing their edges. She did not feel excitement the way she might have expected. She felt wonder, yes, but it was a quiet wonder, the kind that makes you whisper without realizing. Brindle's eyes shone. "There," she murmured. "Do you see?" Mira nodded. The pale line rose to the surface, and for a moment it lay on the water like a strand of light. It did not flash or sparkle loudly. It simply existed, gentle and sure, like the softest sigh. Brindle reached into her pocket and drew out a small spool made of smooth wood. She held it near the basin, not touching the water, and waited. The strand of hush drifted toward the spool by itself, as if it recognized where it wanted to rest. Slowly, it lifted from the water and curled onto the spool, winding without any hands guiding it. Mira watched in a kind of calm amazement. The thread did not look wet. It looked like the moment when rain becomes mist, when sound becomes silence, when breath becomes sleep. When the strand had settled, Brindle put the spool away with careful reverence. She stood, and in doing so she seemed slightly lighter as though she had been given not only a thread but a small easing of weight. "It chose to come," Brindle said softly. "That matters." Mira's eyes felt heavy, but her mind was clear in a dreamy way. "What happens now?" Brindle smiled. "Now we finish the coat, and then we let it do what it was made to do." They walked back through the trees. The rain had become even gentler, thinning to a soft mist. The forest seemed to breathe with them. Back in town, the lamps glowed like fireflies trapped in glass. The shop window of cloud and thread looked especially inviting now, warm and quiet, a pocket of comfort in the rainy night. Inside Brindle hung Mira's borrowed coat, back on its hook, as though it were a cherished friend. Then she moved to the pale, unfinished raincoat on its special hanger. Mira sat near the stove watching. The shop felt like a nest made of fabric and warmth. Brindle's hands were slow and sure. She laid the coat on the work table and pulled out the spool of hush thread. She threaded a needle made of something that looked like bone polished by river water. As Brindle stitched, the room seemed to grow even quieter, as if it were listening to the needle pass through cloth. Each tiny movement had a rhythm. Pull, breathe, settle. Pull, breathe, settle. Mira's eyelids lowered and lifted again, as if she were practicing sleep. She watched the way Brindle's face softened as she worked, the way her shoulders were relaxed, the way she seemed to be guided by patience itself. Outside, the rain whispered against the window. It did not try to get in. It simply kept company. Brindle finished the last stitch and tied it off with a knot so small it seemed like a secret. Then she lifted the raincoat gently and shook it once, just enough to let it fall into its full shape. It looked different now, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that made Mira's chest feel warm. The coat seemed to hold its own atmosphere. It looked like a cloud that had decided to become wearable. The fabric was matte and soft, yet it caught light in a delicate sheen like moonlight on mist. Brindle hung it again and stepped back. "There," she whispered, "the softest raincoat in the world." Mira looked at it as if she were looking at something that belonged to a dream, yet had found its way into the waking world. Brindle turned to Mira. "Would you like to try it on?" Mira hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because the moment felt sacred, like stepping into a quiet chapel. Then she stood and approached. Brindle lifted the coat and held it open. Mira slid her arms into the sleeves. The coat settled over her like warm fog. Not heavy, never heavy. It was as if the air itself had become kindly and decided to drape itself around her shoulders. The inside lining was astonishing. It felt like brushed petals, like the underside of a leaf, like the softest part of a blanket warmed by sunlight and cooled again to perfect comfort. Mira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Brindle adjusted the collar. "It fits," she said, pleased. Mira looked down at herself. She looked quieter, not smaller, not hidden, simply softened around the edges like a candle flame seen through paper. Brindle handed Mira a small mirror. Mira looked into it and saw her own face relaxed. eyes gentler, brow smooth. "How does it do that?" Mira asked, her voice hushed. Brindle took the mirror back and set it down. "Some things don't protect by resisting," she said. "They protect by comforting, by reminding the body it is safe." The rain outside had nearly stopped, as if it too wanted to be gentle with this moment. The world felt held in a pause. Brindle gestured toward the door. "Take it for a walk," she said. "Let it meet the weather." Mira stepped outside again, now wearing the softest raincoat. At first there was only mist. It drifted through lamplight like breath. The air was cool, but the coat held warmth in a balanced way, neither too much nor too little, like the perfect temperature of a pillow. Then, as Mira walked, rain began again. Small and slow, drops spaced like notes in a lullaby. The coat received the rain without any sharp sound. Each drop landed as if on velvet. Mira listened and heard only a faint hush, a soft shh that seemed to come from the coat itself, like it was soothing the rain. Mira walked along the river. The water moved with the same calm. Her footsteps were quiet. Her breathing slowed. She realized something as she walked. She could feel the presence of the rain without discomfort. She was aware of its coolness, its freshness, the way it cleaned the air. But she did not feel attacked by it. She did not feel she had to brace herself. She felt accompanied. Along the riverbank, a small garden stretched, planted with night-blooming flowers. Their pale faces turned upward, collecting droplets. Mira passed them slowly. The raincoat made her feel as if she were part of this garden, part of the gentle exchange between sky and earth. A cat sat on a windowsill nearby, watching the rain with half-closed eyes. It looked at Mira, then blinked slowly, as if approving of her softness. Mira smiled and continued. At the end of the street, she found a path that led toward the hills. The rain deepened slightly, but still remained kind. She walked up the path, feeling the coat move with her like a calm companion. The hills were dark shapes under the clouded sky. Somewhere above, the moon hid behind mist, but its presence was felt as a subtle brightening of the night. Mira reached a small overlook where the town lay below. All warm windows and glowing lamps, wrapped in rain and quiet. She stood there for a while, and the coat seemed to invite her to do nothing but breathe. In the hush, Mira's mind began to drift through memories. Not in a sharp way, not in a way that tugged her awake, but in a slow, dreamy way. She thought of roads she had walked, of rooms she had stayed in, of mornings when she had woken too early and felt the weight of the day waiting. But now, standing in the rain with this softness around her, those memories felt distant, like boats on another river. They did not pull, they simply floated by. The raincoat whispered its hush against her skin, and Mira felt her body learning a new habit, to relax even while the world moved. When she returned to town, The rain had thinned again to mist. The shop window glowed. Brindle was waiting inside, as if she had been there all along, as if time behaved differently in a room full of soft cloth and quiet work. Mira stepped in and removed the raincoat carefully, as though taking off a fragile dream. Yet she did not feel the dream leaving. The softness seemed to remain in her muscles. Brindle hung the coat gently. "It suits you," she said. Mira looked at the coat on its hanger. "Is it meant for me?" she asked, surprised by her own question. Brindle's eyes warmed. "The coat doesn't belong to anyone the way a coin belongs in a pocket," she said. "It belongs where it is needed. Tonight it belonged with you. Tomorrow it may belong somewhere else." Mira nodded slowly, understanding without needing to fully explain it. Some gifts were like that, shared, passed on, returned. Brindle poured another cup of tea. Mira took it and held it close. The rain outside faded into a near silence. The shop became a small island of warmth. Brindle spoke softly, almost as if she were speaking to the air rather than to Mira. "There are people who think softness is weakness," she said. "But the world is held together by soft things. Moss holds soil, clouds hold water, blankets hold sleep, kind voices hold tired hearts." Mira felt her eyes grow heavy again. "I've been tired," she admitted. Brindle nodded. "Then you've been carrying a lot." Mira sipped her tea. She felt the warmth travel down into her body like a slow river. She felt her breathing deepen. "What will you do with the coat now?" Mira asked, her voice already drifting. Brindle smiled. "I'll let it rest. Soft things need rest, too." Mira's thoughts began to blur at the edges like ink touched by water. The shop's light seemed softer. The stove's ticking became a steady, soothing rhythm. Brindle guided Mira to a small room in the back where a daybed sat beneath a window. The bed was made with clean linens and a quilt, stitched with tiny cloud shapes. "You can sleep here," Brindle said gently. "Rain makes the best lullaby, especially when you don't have to fight it." Mira lay down. The quilt settled over her, and it felt familiar in the way comfort sometimes does, as if her body recognized it from a long time ago. Brindle dimmed the lamp until the room was filled with a gentle dusk. Outside, the last of the rain tapped softly at the glass. Not demanding, not loud, just present. Mira's breathing slowed. Her hands unclenched. Her shoulders sank into the bed. Brindle's voice came like a distant whisper from the doorway. "Let the night hold you," she said. "Let the rain wash your thoughts smooth." The room was quiet. The air smelled faintly of tea and clean cloth. The window was a dark mirror with moving softness behind it. And somewhere in the shop, the softest raincoat in the world hung in stillness, resting after its gentle work, as if it too was listening to the hush between raindrops. The night in Larkhaven continued calm and patient. The river flowed steady and low. The hills waited dark and kind. And in the little back room, Mira drifted deeper, the way a leaf drifts down through quiet air. No hurry, no effort, just letting go. Her thoughts became fewer, then softer, then thinner, like mist dissolving into night. Breath in and out, in and out. The rain was nearly gone now, but the feeling of it remained. Clean, cool, soothing, like a hand smoothing a blanket. The shop's warmth held steady. The world outside did not ask anything of her, and perhaps as Mira slept, the softest raincoat dreamed its own small dream of future evenings, of other tired travelers, of gentle rain and kinder steps, of the way softness can be a doorway into peace. Everything slowed. Everything softened. The night folded itself around the town like a quiet cloak. And you, listening now, can let your own body follow that same gentle path. Let your forehead smooth. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Let your breath become slow and natural, as if your lungs have all the time in the world. Any thoughts that appear can drift by like clouds, unhurried, unimportant. You don't need to hold them. You don't need to solve them. You can simply rest. The raincoat's hush is only a story, and yet the softness it brings can be real in your body, real in your shoulders, your chest, your hands, your belly, your legs. Softer, heavier, calmer. The night is safe. The air is gentle. Sleep is close, like a warm light behind closed eyes. And as the last ripples of the story settle, you can drift in peace. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.